Mr. President, I've come to this floor this evening to speak very briefly about the physical security of our nation's power grid, a very important subject, and this is a subject that recent stories in the Wall Street Journal about a coordinated attack on the California Metcalf substation that happened last April has drawn really considerable attention to. And while those stories about that attack highlighted potential vulnerabilities within the system, my principal focus here today will be to highlight not only the safeguards that are already in place to protect the nation's public power system, but also to announce a step that I believe is now necessary to prevent the undue release of sensitive, non-public information. First and foremost, and I think this is important for people to recognize, it is important to remember during the Metcalf incident that the PG&E system did not lose power. In fact, it was an incident that many didn't know had taken place until months after, because there was no loss of power. And I think that this fact emphasizes the grid's resiliency and the importance of building redundancy into the bulk power system. And as usual, the electric industry has learned from and appropriately responded to the California incident. At the end of last year, the Departments of Energy and Homeland Security, along with the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, this is NERC, along with the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the FBI, began a cross-country tour of 10 cities in order to brief utility operators and local law enforcement on the lessons that were learned from Metcalf. Government officials discussed mitigation strategies, and meeting participants were able to develop some pretty important relationships between first responders and the industry. In fact, as a result of the 2005 Energy Policy Act's mandatory requirements, the electric industry has invested significant resources to address both physical and cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities. Through partnerships with various federal agencies, industry is focusing keenly on preparation, prevention, response, and recovery. For example, NERC holds yearly security conferences and a grid exercise which tests and prepares industry on physical and cybersecurity events. And yet, former FERC Chairman John Wellinghoff was quoted in the Wall Street Journal calling the Metcalf incident, quote, the most significant incident of domestic terrorism involving the grid that has ever occurred. Mr. President, in my view, comments such as these are certainly sensational. Depending on the factual context, they can actually be reckless. Although the topic of physical security warrants discussion, absolutely warrants the discussion and the debate, we have to be prudent about information for the public sphere. Many government leaders are privy to confidential and sensitive information that, if not treated carefully, could provide a roadmap to terrorists or other bad actors about our vulnerabilities. At a minimum, government officials have a duty to safeguard sensitive information that they learn in their official capacity. A story that appeared in the Wall Street Journal on March 13 was, I believe, shocking because it included sensitive information about the nation's energy infrastructure that the newspapers said came from documents that were created at FERC. And although the Wall Street Journal did not name specific facilities at risk, it did detail the geographic regions and the number of facilities that, if simultaneously disabled, could cause serious harm. And the article in that March 13 article claimed the potential for a national blackout. I want to commend the FERC chair, Cheryl LaFleur for her statement regarding the publication of this information. And I thank Commissioner Tony Clark as well for his statement about the matter. I think it is fortunate that our current FERC commissioners are an independent lot. I understand that the Commission is looking into this matter, including the question of how sensitive internal FERC documents made their way into a very high-profile news article. And I would urge that the FERC be very diligent in this, truly leave no stone unturned. I have grave questions about the irresponsible release of non-public information that unduly pinpoints potential vulnerabilities of our nation's grid. If this conduct is not already illegal, I have suggested that it should be. The source of the leaked information appears to be someone with access to highly sensitive, narrowly distributed FERC documents. Releasing this sensitive information for publication has put the nation potentially at greater risk and potentially endangered lives, including those of the many good people who are faithfully working every day to maintain and to protect the grid. In order to learn what has happened here and to determine how better to safeguard critical information as steps are being taken to make the grid less vulnerable, my colleague, the chairman of the Energy Committee, Senator Landrieu, and I have written to the Inspector General of the Department of Energy, whose oversight includes the FERC. It is our understanding that the IG has already begun an inquiry into this matter. We've asked him to conclude his inquiry as soon as possible, and we've also asked for his immediate assurance that if the inquiry must ripen into an investigation, that he will, as we have every confidence that he would, but follow the information that he learns wherever it leads. We are eager to receive recommendations to improve the safeguards of keeping sensitive information from disclosure. We've also asked the IG to look into the obligations of current and former FERC commissioners and employees with respect to non-public information. I would certainly hope that the Inspector General's inquiry leads to the identification of the person or persons who provided this sensitive non-public information to the media. But even if it does not, even if we learn that the leak of this information could have been accomplished without the violation of any disclosure restrictions, we will consider introducing legislation to make sure that in the future, the disclosure of non-public information about our energy infrastructure that puts our nation at risk is a violation of federal law. We must remember that the possibility of a physical attack that disables key parts of the grid has always been a risk. Again, in this instance, though, with the Metcalfe instance, our system worked, no power was lost. Therefore, I urge a measured approach when evaluating our next steps in response to Metcalfe. Erecting barriers at every transmission substation and surveillance of every inch of transmission is just not feasible. I'm concerned that these types of measures will potentially cost billions of dollars with little impact. There must also be a balance between the measures related to physical security and the costs that would likely be passed on through to consumers. On March 7th, the FERC used the Grid Reliability Framework of Congress established in the 2005 Energy Policy Act by directing NERC to establish standards addressing physical vulnerabilities to better protect our nation's power grid. NERC has 90 days now to develop its proposed standards through a collaborative process. The proposed standard will then be reviewed independently before it's submitted to the FERC. Mr. President, our Energy Policy Act standards are foundational. Constant information sharing between government and industry, coupled with alerts for rapid response, are also key tools for dealing with the changing state of security. As policymakers, we must include physical security as a key issue in our decisions. We must also take measured steps to protect the grid, but we shouldn't sensationalize the threat. I commend NERC and FERC for starting the standard-setting process, and I would urge all the participants to strike this balance between measures related to physical security and costs and benefits for electric customers, and the broader public as a whole. Again, I thank the chairman of the Energy Committee for her willingness to join me on this letter, which, again, as I feel, is very important as we begin this review through the Inspector General. I know that you, Mr. President, as a valued member of the Energy Committee, are very keenly aware of these issues when we talk about our grid reliability, threats to not only the physical security of our infrastructure, but most certainly the cybersecurity threats that we face.